Hi, this is a recording of the presentation given at the November 14th open house for St. Paul's Pedestrian Plan. I'm Faye Seimer, the Pedestrian Safety Coordinator for the City of St. Paul. I'm here to share information about the development of our plan and some of the outcomes and actions we'll be taking to support walking in our city. This has been over a year's worth of community conversations about how to achieve our plan vision. That St. Paul is a walking city. We are more healthy, resilient, and connected when walking is safe and appealing for all. In this presentation, I'll go over our planning process, highlight what we heard from community members about walking in St. Paul, and identify some of the action items and next steps in the plan to make walking safe and appealing for everyone in our city. A little bit about walking in St. Paul today. We have about 1,080 miles of sidewalk in our city. We typically are able to replace about 6 to 8 miles of that network annually, so that tells you a little bit about the overall condition of our sidewalk network. We have approximately 330 miles of sidewalk gaps in St. Paul, so that's a street without sidewalk on one or both sides of it. We also know that both in St. Paul and nationally, pedestrian crashes are an overrepresented percentage of the serious and fatal traffic collisions we see on our streets. Some of the reasons for creating a pedestrian plan as a way to respond to some of these issues in St. Paul. The first is this is an opportunity to hear from community members about our values related to walking and to set policies that reflect those values. These policies will guide staff and elected officials' decisions in a way that is more equitable, transparent, and consistent, and helps us prioritize areas where the needs for walking investment are greatest. This plan has also been a great opportunity to start conversations with St. Paul community members and really change our culture and how we think about the importance of walking as a way to get around in our city. When I talked with folks about why walking is important, here are some quotes on the right of the screen of what you said. We heard people say walking helps calm your body, it's a basic human function and city infrastructure should support it. It's a way for me to check out new businesses in my neighborhood. Really what I heard is that walking is fundamental to who we are as human beings and how we participate in this community. This plan kicked off in January of 2018. We spent the spring out in the community having conversations with folks, asking questions via our surveys, and using that to understand folks' priorities when it comes to walking. Over the summer, we were developing the plan in close coordination with our plan steering committee, and here we are in the fall with a preliminary draft out for folks to take a look at, and we'll be moving it through the formal plan review and adoption process later this year, and hopefully bringing it to City Council in early 2019. So what have we heard about walking in St. Paul? First, here's a snapshot of who we heard from. As I said, the plan was guided by 26 very dedicated steering committee members who met monthly over the course of the plan's development. This includes representatives from city staff, from our legislative wards, from St. Paul's partner agencies like Ramsey County and MnDOT, and some citizen representatives, including a member of St. Paul's Transportation Committee and our Stop For Me committee. We met with over 40 folks at our spring open house. We also heard from thousands more via our online survey. I spent the summer of 2017 at numerous community events asking people about walking and hearing from 1,500 folks back about what walking means to them via a questionnaire. We also had information up at libraries, as well as I did some outreach specifically with folks who we don't traditionally hear from via things like an online survey. So I met with an English language learner class, the Teen Advisory Council from Skyline Towers, and others, so that I could sit down and have conversations with folks about their experiences walking in St. Paul. So here are some of the things that we heard. Given the different choices we asked folks about in terms of what would make walking safer and easier for you, the top 3 responses were improving ways to cross busy streets, adding sidewalks to streets without sidewalks, and improving snow and ice removal on sidewalks. We also asked folks, where is it most important to improve walking? And again, our top 3 responses were along and across busy streets, in areas of the city that lack sidewalks, and in neighborhoods whose residents rely on walking the most. So in thinking about how to translate these questions about where walking investments are most important into geographic areas, we translated each of the different potential priorities into a measure that we could map. So for example, we looked at this priority of neighborhoods whose residents rely on walking the most, and we looked at data that told us census tracts that are areas of concentrated poverty where 50% or more of residents are racial minorities. We looked at census tracts with high numbers of vehicle-less households and census tracts with high numbers of people with disabilities. And we used that type of information to create measures for every census tract in St. Paul. And we weighted those measures according to the priorities that we heard from folks through outreach. So again, neighborhoods whose residents rely on walking the most translated into equity measures, areas of the city that lack sidewalk translated into measures of connectivity, and along and across busy streets, we were able to map our 4-lane and 3-lane undivided roads in St. Paul. So using that information, we created our map of priority areas for walking investment. This is a great outcome of our pedestrian plan and is a tool for decision making going forward about where we should most invest in walking safety in St. Paul. It doesn't mean that we won't be making investments in our low or medium priority areas, but as an example of what it does mean, the city has a lot of opportunities to seek external funding for things like sidewalk infill, safe routes to school programming, partnerships with Ramsey County and MnDOT to fund sidewalk or crossing improvements on their roads. And when we're looking at these types of opportunities, our first look as a city will be at locations in these green high priority areas for walking investment. Now a little bit about those infrastructure priorities to address that question of how will we make walking safer in different areas. So the first priority we heard from folks is improving crossings. So here are some things that we know about crossing the street in St. Paul. The biggest threats to people crossing the street are vehicle speeds and crossing distances. You can see from the graphic at the left on your screen that there's a dramatic difference in folks' survival rates if they're in a crash with a vehicle at 20 versus 30 versus 40 miles per hour. And so one of the most important things we can do fundamentally to help people be safe on our roads is address speeds and the distances or number of lanes that people have to travel across when they're trying to cross the street. We also have a toolbox of things like crosswalk markings and signs that can help draw attention to crossings, and they can help increase rates of drivers yielding to pedestrians. However, we also need to be looking bigger at tools that help address and control speeds and reduce the distance that people have to cross when they're moving across our streets. There's also a section in the plan talking about maintenance and operations, and we recognize that everything we build or paint must be maintained, and so our plan is an opportunity to discuss not just how we build the capital to make our city safe for pedestrians, but how we grow our operations and maintenance to keep those new features in good condition. Here are some of the actions identified in the pedestrian plan, specifically to improve crossings and make people be safe crossing the street. One is a policy statement that we will plan, design, build, and maintain the city's transportation system in a way that prioritizes walking first, followed by bicycling and transit use, and lastly, other vehicles. We'll also establish a consistent process for reviewing, improving, and prioritizing pedestrian crossings. Again, having a transparent and written down process will help us be more equitable in assuring that all areas of St. Paul are assessed according to the same criteria. We'll look to provide regular crossing opportunities on collector and arterial streets, prioritizing those in high priority areas for walking investment. What that means is we know that there are busy roads in St. Paul, collectors and arterials that are hard to cross, and we don't want to have situations where the nearest stoplight or crossing is a quarter of a mile away. It's unreasonable for someone to walk there, and so we'll be looking for ways to make improvements to those roads, starting in high priority areas for walking investments. And lastly, we will pursue opportunities to install and maintain interim pedestrian crossing improvements using low-cost materials like the one in the bottom photo on this slide. Again, knowing that these do incur maintenance costs for us, and we'll be looking for opportunities to install these in situations where they can later be made permanent. Adding sidewalks to streets without sidewalks. What we know, as I mentioned, there are approximately 330 miles of sidewalk gaps in St. Paul, and 62 miles of these are on busy roads. Those are our collector and arterial streets that serve more traffic and have more destinations along them for people to walk to. We do not have a dedicated funding source for construction of new sidewalk in our city, and the mixture of funding sources and tools that we have available to us create uneven property owner assessments. So we have different federal and county partnerships and grants fund different percentage of sidewalk construction, and without a dedicated funding source of the cities, we look to property owner assessments to pay for the remainder of that gap. As I mentioned before, our existing sidewalk is about 1,100 miles. We replace about 6 to 8 miles of this network annually, leaving many of our sidewalks in poor condition. So, some of the actions in the pedestrian plan to address sidewalk condition. One is a policy statement that we will construct sidewalks on both sides of every street as part of street reconstruction projects in accordance with St. Paul City Council's Resolution 17-65. Another is we'll require sidewalks on all sides of parcels undergoing site redevelopment. So site redevelopment and road reconstruction are some opportunities to add these sidewalks when other work is going on. We'll also use our map of high priority areas for walking investment to select areas for grant funding opportunities to build new sidewalks, such as Safe Routes to School, the Metropolitan Council's regional solicitation, and Ramsey County partnerships. And we'll also be studying alternative funding structures to construct new sidewalk in a way that equitably distributes property assessment burdens. And the third priority for making walking an easier, safer in St. Paul is clearing snow and ice. So some of the things that we know about snow and ice, we know it snows here. St. Paul is a winter city. In our community, property owners are responsible for removing snow and ice within 24 hours of a snowfall. Something that I'm not sure a lot of folks are aware of is exactly the process for what happens if someone fails to shovel snow and ice after that snowfall. One of the things I learned from this planning process is that when a complaint is made to the St. Paul's Department of Safety and Inspections, the first step is that a letter is mailed to the property owner letting them know that a complaint has been made on their property, and letting them know that an inspection will be scheduled in another 24 or 48 hours after the letter is received. What I've learned is that 80% of the time, those letters are effective in reminding property owners to shovel their walks, and they aren't issued fines at that time. And so that's something to keep in mind about the existing system in terms of how things function today. Beyond property owners, there's a patchwork of responsibility in terms of keeping snow and ice clear. The city is responsible for clearing on parks, bridges, and things like refuge islands, medians, islands and stairs. if you think about those types of facilities, especially downtown. And when it comes to city responsibility for snow clearance, the city prioritizes street plowing first, then pedestrian facilities in our snow clearing schedule. So some of the things that we'll be doing to address snow and ice removal on our roads. One of the actions in the plan is to develop a public awareness campaign to educate residents and businesses about city snow removal ordinance and encourage people to report violations, again, recognizing that letters are a cost-effective way to help address some of these issues. We'll be exploring a proactive system to address non-compliance with sidewalk shoveling ordinance so that we don't have to rely on community members to issue complaints. And lastly, we will be exploring ways to accelerate corner clearing after snowfalls, especially in high priority areas for walking investments. Beyond our infrastructure, our plan also talks about the programs that St. Paul City staff support to help enforce, educate, encourage, and evaluate use of our walking network. We have 4 key programs that I'll highlight here. The first is our Stop For Me campaign, which is a partnership between St. Paul Police District, community members, and Public Works to help raise awareness of our state's crosswalk law and issue citations to drivers who fail to yield to a pedestrian in a crosswalk. Our plan makes recommendations to continue to host officer-supported Stop For Me events, as well as to continue to partner with community volunteers at these events to help raise awareness among folks and spread the word about the importance of stopping for pedestrians. We also support a Safe Routes to School program that's been growing steadily in St. Paul in the last 5 to 10 years. We now have 7 out of 7 completed Safe Routes to School plans in our city, and we currently collaborate closely with St. Paul Public School District and Ramsey County to advance education and encouragement of safe walking at our schools. St. Paul has a program to count our pedestrians and bicyclists at various intersections throughout our city. We conduct annual counts each year, and we actually ask volunteers to help collect those tallies at various intersections. This is a really important way that we can develop data and numbers about use of our pedestrian network and show change over time in terms of the number of people who are choosing to walk in St. Paul. And lastly, the city administers a Paint the Pavement program, which is a great way for community members to have conversations with each other about walking in their neighborhood. And the plan makes recommendations to help us publicize the pavement program, to promote increased participation, and streamline our application process to make it easier for folks and community members to initiate these projects. So I'll close with next steps in the development of the pedestrian plan. A preliminary version of the plan is available on our website, stpaul.gov/walking. That version will be shared with our Transportation Committee in November and with our Planning Commission in December. At that December Planning Commission meeting, we will request that the Planning Commission release the draft plan for formal public comment. Assuming that the Planning Commission makes that motion on December 14th, we will open the public comment period for the plan, and that will run about 5 weeks before taking it back to the Planning Commission for a public hearing, which will be tentatively in late January of 2019. After the public hearing and after closing that public comment period, I will be summarizing comments and sharing them with the Transportation Committee and Planning Commission in early 2019, revising the draft accordingly, and hopefully bringing it to City Council in March of 2019. So some of the takeaways here are just to let folks know what's coming, and to say that as we move through these next steps in our planning process Information will be posted on our website, stpaul.gov/walking, letting folks know about ways to comment and when that comment period has opened. So with that, I want to say thank you for listening to this presentation, and I look forward to supporting walking in St. Paul. Thank you.